Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. Remember to subscribe to our free podcast so you won't miss any of our illuminating content. Here is episode 172.
We can control how we show up to any situation. And when we know our own individual why, the thing that inspires us, the thing that drives us, the difference that we make to the lives of people, we can do that wherever we are.
Benjamin Franklin once said, "Do not curse the darkness, rather light a candle instead." If you're ready to set your mind on fire, then prepare yourself for the Luminous Mind with your host, Rebecca Bowman.
Today's fire starter is David Mead. David believes that every one of us deserves to wake up inspired to go to work, feel safe while we're there, and come home at the end of the day fulfilled by the work we do. He works with leaders to help them create an environment where people show up to work because they want to, not because they have to. Everything David does is designed to propel people to be a little bit more than they were yesterday so that they can do more in the world. In 2004, David began his career in corporate training. In 2009, he became frustrated and discouraged by his personal experience with poor leadership in the workplace. That same year, David met Simon Sinek, a world-renowned think leader and author of Start With Why, a New York Times bestseller, Leaders Eat Last. An opportunity to join Simon's team presented itself, and David eagerly jumped on board. Drawn to the Start With Why team's desire to inspire people to do the things that inspire them, David began developing communication and content, which evolved into speaking and facilitating workshops inspired by Simon's simple yet powerful message. David now travels internationally, helping people shift their perceptions about the reason their organizations really exist, what leadership is, and how human biology plays into it all. He has worked with organizations in a wide variety of industries, including Johnson & Johnson, Zappos, Capital One, Home Depot, and Hyatt. Well, welcome, David.
Thanks. Nice to be here.
We are so excited to have you join us and discuss the ideas of Start With Why, as well as how to implement those into our own lives. But before we get into any of that, can you please tell our audience a little bit more about yourself?
Sure. I'm based in Salt Lake City, Utah, and I've been working with Simon Sinek in the Start With Why team since 2009. And the way that I met Simon, I was just working at a little startup company here in Salt Lake about 7 years ago, and he came to speak to our little group. The CEO of the company knew somebody who knew him, and so that we had that sort of loose connection. And so he came in and he shared this, the basic concept and idea behind Start With Why and the Golden Circle. And I just kept in touch with him after he came to speak to us. And this was before, he had any books or TED Talks or anything like that. Nobody really knew who he was, but I was really inspired by the idea, and we kept in touch, and we can maybe tell more of the story, but that's the beginning, and that's kind of what brings me here today.
Yeah. Well, and I'd love to hear a little bit more about that story. Before we began recording, we had discussed how, we deal with a lot of people who are either educationally minded or family minded, those types of things. But we're going to try to tailor that discussion more to those personal areas. But, I do want to hear more about kind of your own personal journey of how you kind of came to this idea of Start With Why.
Yeah, so I would consider myself a lifelong learner. I got that from my mom. I actually was homeschooled or self-directed learning. That was not even a term. But I was homeschooled for a few years when I was a kid. But even, before and after that, there was always this thing. And my mom has the same thing, but she really instilled in the kids that, always be learning. It's just this constant thing that I have, and I love to learn. And so the position that I was filling in this organization when I met Simon, I was the director of training. And I had been in corporate training for, a few years, and by that point, because I love to teach and watch people learn and see the light bulb go on. And so, it was just sort of this very natural thing for me to want to learn more about Simon's message and these concepts after he left. The idea behind the Golden Circle, or this idea of why, or common or higher cause or purpose, it's not that it was something brand new to me. It's, I innately knew what it was in a work scenario. I had jobs before that I loved, where I loved going to work. I couldn't wait to get there. I felt fulfilled while I was there. I loved the people I work with. And at the same time, I had other jobs that, I liked what I did, but I didn't get the same feeling, and I couldn't quite figure out what the difference was. And so with Simon's message of having this higher cause or purpose, having organizations that know why they exist, and more specifically, having people know why they show up to work every day and what drives and inspires them to do the things that they do, all of a sudden these things started to sort of fall into place. And I could see the reason that I loved certain jobs and only liked or didn't like other ones. And the reason that I felt more fulfilled doing some things that I did and not so fulfilled doing other things. So it was sort of that light bulb going on for me, where all of a sudden, it's not that I didn't know it, but it was sort of like he flipped the light on in a room in my brain that had been dark before. And so it just sort of shed a lot of light on some things that really sort of cleared the path for me, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and let's talk about the ideas behind Start With Why. I've discussed them a little bit before on my podcast, but I don't think a lot of people kind of understand maybe the golden circle, some of those terms that we talk about when we talk about the Start With Why. Give us the ideas behind it.
Sure. So Simon, he did not come up with the idea or the concept of purpose. This has been around for thousands of years, obviously, but about 10 years ago, he discovered a simple model to help explain how successful and inspiring leaders and organizations think, act, and communicate. And it's a simple model called the golden circle. And it's a bullseye, basically, with 3 circles or 3 sections. Right in the middle in the bullseye is why. Then one ring out from that is how. And then the outer ring is the what. And the idea is that every organization and even our own careers, our own lives operate on these 3 levels: what we do, how we do it, and why we do it. Everybody knows what they do. This is, in a business sense, it's the product you sell, the service you offer. It's the thing that you do. It's what keeps you busy every day. It's, whether it be a job or teaching your kids or, doing charity work, whatever it is, that's what you do. Some people know how they do what they do, and how are you different or special? How do you set yourself apart from somebody else who's doing about the same thing that you're doing? So features, benefits, those kind of differentiating factors. But the idea is that very few individuals and very few organizations understand, or more importantly, can clearly articulate and talk about why they do what they do. And this is the higher cause or purpose. This is the reason behind doing the work that you do. And this is not about making more money or advancing your career or, making sure that your kids do well in school. Those are all results. By why, we mean what bigger impact are you having? What's the more long-term effect or the long-term result of what you're doing? Does that help?
Yeah. Well, and on our show, I guess that's what we would necessarily call like our legacy, right? Like the reasons, the whole root cause of you wanting to strive to do a certain thing is kind of the idea behind that, like the passion that drives you, correct? Is that?
Yep, exactly. Okay. Yeah.
Great. And when we talked about like with the why, I mean, a lot of us even can get stuck in the daily grind of things, of the how and the why. And sometimes that really helps us. I love when Simon Sinek talked about it, that kind of happened with him when he was kind of running his business is, you get stuck in that mire of just the business and the processes and all of that stuff that you really stop understanding your why. And he gave some examples. Do you want to kind of fill us in on maybe some examples that you've seen of people who are operating without their why?
Sure. It's easier maybe to give an example of an organization just because it's easy to see. And I think the concept is a little easier to understand that way. But if anybody watches TV, look at any commercial. Let me say, look at 98% of the commercials out there. But any organization that shows you a picture of their product, talks about the features and benefits and what the product does and how it's cheaper than somebody else's or how it's better or different, those are all amazing examples of starting with what and how. And if you talk about on an individual basis, maybe a little bit tougher to see, on the grand scale, but anybody who is solely focused on their career or what they do every day and really never gets to the difference they're trying to make, the legacy they're trying to build, the thing they want to be remembered for. I think about it this way: at the end of your life, at your, funeral services, nobody is going to get up and talk about how much money you made or talk about, how much stuff you sold, or they don't talk about that. they talk about who you are as a person, the difference that you made in the lives of others, how you impacted the people that are sitting in the room or, that are outside of the room. But it's all about that human reason that you did the work that you do, or that you did the thing that you do. So rather than trying to wait until the end of our lives to hear what people say about us, why aren't we living that way and showing up in that way where people can see while we're still alive, this is the reason this person shows up. They make this difference. They make this impact on the lives of people. That's inspiring. And that inspires other people to look for that same thing within themselves. And when we get a whole, I'm talking more holistically now, but when you get more and more and more people that show up inspired to do something rather than just to do more what's, let's really make a difference, to really make an impact in the lives of people, we end up with, better societies, better, schools, better organizations, whatever you want to, whatever group you want to work with. But that's what inspires people, is the why rather than the what.
Exactly. I think it's interesting when we talk about, if somebody comes up to you, they ask you, what do you do? And then, they never ask you why you do that or whatever. But
Sure.
When you're talking about education, particularly homeschooling or self-education, those types of things, it's actually a very common question. Like, why do you do that? What power can we get in really examining our why?
You made a good point, which is that it's difficult to talk about why we do what we do. And nobody asks you, so, why do you do this? They just say, what do you do? And then when you tell them, they might, especially for something like self-directed education, they might say, well, why do you do that? And even with that why question, we tend to jump to the how or the what. And we say, well, I can give my child more attention. It doesn't take as long for them to learn the same concepts they learn in school. I can choose what my child learns. I mean, we talk about all of these things that we do and the what and the how, but it's difficult to talk about why we do it, the bigger cause or purpose. And the reason for that, and this is something that Simon explains in his TED Talk, is that it's biological. And I don't know how much detail you want to get into here, but the way that the brain maps out actually matches up perfectly with the golden circle. So the outer part of the brain that controls the logical thought, the rational thinking that we have, the intellect, and our language, corresponds with the what part of the golden circle. It's the outer section of the brain, and it controls all those things. The inner part of the brain, that's called the limbic system, is responsible for feelings. It's responsible for decision-making and for behavior, but it has no capacity for language. And so the why is a feeling. It's a belief. It's something that we feel. And because of that, because it comes from a part of the brain that controls those feelings and those emotions and that belief and does not control language, it's difficult for us to talk about why we do what we do. Same thing trying to answer emotional questions. Emotional questions are difficult to answer. Why do you love your wife? I don't know. I mean, it's like,
and then you revert back to the what again, right?
Exactly. Yeah. You say, well, she's fun. She's smart. She's beautiful. I trust her. We do everything together. She's very talented. Great. Those are all what's. And it also sounds like a really nice golden retriever. I mean, it doesn't actually, those are the wonderful qualities of everyone's wife. It's not that the feeling is not there. It's not that there's any doubt that we love this human being more than anyone else on the planet. The problem is we have a hard time talking about it. And so this is the reason that most individuals and most organizations start with what, is because that's easy to talk about. The why is a little bit tougher. So, when somebody comes up to you and says, what do you do? There are a couple of different ways to answer that you can start with why. And, a couple of the ways that we have found that work pretty well are, let me tell you what I do, but first let me tell you why I do it. Or let me tell you what I believe. And we talk about, how we believe in, I don't know, whatever it is. Trying to think of a good example with self-directed learning here. But, let's say that we want to make sure that our children grow up and can be, productive members of society and really make a difference in the changing world that we have.
And think for themselves.
And in order to do that, yeah, we want people to, we want to encourage, people to think for themselves. So what I do is I teach my kids at home, because that's what allows them to get to that higher cause or purpose. So that's what allows that world that I imagine to come to be, if that makes sense.
Yeah, that's great. So before we kind of get into how you help people find their why and maybe some of the services that you offer with the Start With Why company, go ahead and tell me a little bit more about how you feel like your paradigms changed over time and with experience, working with Start With Why and Simon Sinek.
Sure. So I used to approach work and my career in a similar way to, I think, most people, which is, I want to get a good job that pays well, that has good benefits, where I can, advance my career and get good raises and make more money and provide for my family. I mean, that's kind of a general approach that a lot of people take to work or to the life path. And the way that things have sort of shifted for me is rather than going in and looking for all the what. And this is a tough transition to make because it sort of takes a leap of faith. There's no guarantee that any of this is going to work out. But just to use my own story, this little company where I was working when I met Simon, I was there for about a week by the time I met him, when he came to speak to us. And I spent the next couple of years at that organization trying to, implement these ideas and to build this culture around starting with why and, making decisions based on what we believed instead of on making more money. And it worked for a little while, but the organization they didn't really pick up on it. They didn't get it, and they weren't willing to put in the effort that it takes, because starting with why is hard. It's a lot easier to focus on the numbers and to go for the short-term gains and all that kind of stuff, rather than building, a real solid culture and doing things for the long term. So after a couple of years of that, they decided they didn't really need me to bring what I was wanting to bring them anymore. And so they let me go. So I got laid off, and they got rid of me the day that they told me. I had a box of stuff, and, they ushered me out of the building. So I had no idea what to do. I had just started MBA school, which is not cheap. I had just had a pretty young son, our first son. And I was like, what am I going to do? And so the rational part of my brain said, well, you need to go get another job. You need to go find a job that will give you the salary that will support your family. But with all of this stuff that I've been learning from Simon over the last couple of years, the other part of my brain was saying, you need to stick with what you believe. And you need to align yourself with a company, which happened to be Simon's, which worked out really nicely, that you believe what they're doing, and you need to show up, and you need to not worry about, how much money am I going to make? You need to worry about, how am I going to make a difference? And if we do it right, and if, it might be painful in the short term, but this is the right thing to do. Thinking, acting, and communicating, starting with why, is the way to become more successful, if that's what you're after. But the goal was not go make more money. The goal was do something that you believe in, do something that fulfills you, do something that fills you up. And when you can do something like that, you show up in a different way. You give more of yourself. You do it more authentically. And when you do that, the results follow. And I had been told that for a couple of years. Simon had been, was talking about this. And I had to just sort of take that leap of faith and hope that that's actually how it was. And so rather than going and getting another, some job that I didn't really care about just to make the money, I took a risk and I partnered with Simon. And it took a couple of years. It wasn't great, and we struggled for a little bit, but I loved the work that I did. And because we were doing it for the right reason, because we were doing it to positively impact the lives of people, our clients could feel that. And so they would tell their clients, and they would tell their clients, or they would tell their friends, and the word of mouth, and things just grew and grew and grew, to the point that now things are going really well. And we are, we're very well known, and we have plenty of work to do. And, we've got incomes that support us and that kind of thing, which is great. But those were all the results. That wasn't the reason that we were doing the work that we were doing. We were doing it for the why, and the what kind of came as a result, which is the way that it should be.
We get a lot of conflicting information out there. Sometimes we tell our kids, or we tell ourselves, to follow your passion or whatever, but then there's other, advice of like, well, we got to do this and this to get into a good school so we can get a good job. And there's a lot of different conflicting ideas out there. What do you feel like? Do you feel like it's just really important to just follow that passion? Or, is there a point where we have to take a job and find the why behind it? Does that make sense of what I'm trying to say?
Yeah, it's a great point. And I think the key to all that is balance. There are certain times where, like, if we don't just get a job, then, we're going to lose our house or whatever it is. And so we have to take care of the what. So I'm not saying that, let's not pretend that reality doesn't strike and that we don't need to focus on the what from time to time. That's fine. The key is to find the balance. So if we, take a job, or we do something because we feel like we have to meet that immediate need, I think just simply recognizing that we are out of balance and we're putting too much focus on the what and working toward regaining the balance. And to your point, if we take a job because we have to, can we still find the why behind that job? Absolutely, yes. Because we can control how we show up to any situation. And when we know our own individual why, the thing that inspires us, the thing that drives us, the difference that we make to the lives of people, we can do that wherever we are. And there are certain environments that might support that or that might help us to do that more easily than others. But we can't blame it on, well, I'm not in the, I don't have the right job to live my why, or I don't have the right circumstances to live my why. Because as long as we're surrounded by people and we can make a difference in the lives of those people, we have the opportunity to live our why.
Yeah.
And so I think finding that balance is really, really important.
Yeah. Well, and, in your bio, you talk about working with leaders to help create an atmosphere where people show up to work. We can really be leaders, whatever our station in life is, that we can, like you
Absolutely.
said, find people to inspire. Let's maybe talk about some of the work that you do with Start With Why, and, what services you offer and how you really challenge them to be successful in finding their why.
Sure. So it's a range from anything as simple as just coming in and giving a talk, just to introduce an organization or a group of people to the concept and get them to think about it a little bit differently. Because again, this takes conventional thinking and sort of turns it on its head. So that's sort of the entry point. And then we do a lot of what we call why discovery workshops. And we do those with individuals as well as with organizations to help these folks begin to articulate and talk about why they do what they do, and to take that thinking to the next level of not only, do I understand the concept that I should start with why, but now I actually have some words that I can put to my own why that I can begin to act upon. And so we do a lot of that. But to your point of leadership and what that actually means, I think there's sort of a common thread throughout the work that we do, which is that leadership is not a rank or a title or a position. Anyone has the capacity to lead. And even if you are not a leader by title, and even if forget even having a job. If you're not a person who has a career, you can still lead your own life. And starting with why and understanding why you do what you do is still a very powerful thing in order to help you individually, whether you're leading, a group of people or whether you're just leading yourself. The other, those are kind of the standard things that we do. But just like every person, every organization is different. Every organization has different needs. Every organization is in a different place along this path of either discovering or articulating or living their why. So we do quite a bit of, custom work as well, where we just sort of get an assessment or an evaluation of where a person or an organization is and sort of take them down the direction that they need to go to get to the place where they want to arrive.
Well, I was kind of laughing at one of Simon's New York Times bestsellers, Leaders Eat Last, and thinking like, well, most moms are leaders then because they're always eating last, right? And
absolutely. I mean, this is exactly the point that we make, is that leadership is a lot like parenting. I mean, you will always, as a parent, make sure that your kids are fed and clothed first. That's the first concern. I mean, leadership is that. It's putting the needs of someone else before your own. And parenting is a perfect example of that.
Yeah. Well, and that's why I could find so much to correlate between, being a business leader and being a leader in your home. Because, I really think that the most successful families that we see are families that have a why. I gave an example when I did my audio blog on, sometimes we spend a lot of time doing the what with our kids of like, oh, we need to go to church, or we need to be like this and we need to be like that. But when kids, we see kids go astray when they're just following the what, that they don't understand, like, well, why would we want to do that? What would be why do we go to church? What's the purpose behind that? And sometimes we just focus on, like, with their behavior, if they're behaving a certain way, that's the what of what, we're focusing on. But why is it so important to be honest? Why is it so?
Well, I think, you brought up the religious aspect with it, which I think for those who are religious, I think there's an easy correlation there, because the religion is all about belief. It's all about higher cause and purpose, and what are we working toward and what are we striving to be or to become. But even for those who don't have a religious affiliation, I think, there's so many just good principles that parents want to teach their kids, like being honest, taking care of other people, doing the right thing. It's none of that is tied specifically to religion or can't be used outside of that. I mean, I have two small kids, one who is a bit sassy. The other one isn't old enough for that yet. But, you can tell your kid, don't cross the street by yourself. That's the what, right?
Yeah.
But if you explain to them the reason that you don't cross the street by yourself, that, there are a lot of these cars. I want you to, I want to see you get married. I want to see you, get old. I want to be around you for the rest of my life. And if you cross the street, you might get hit by a car and that won't happen. If you put that into that context and, your kid loves you, they want to be around you too, all of a sudden it makes more sense. And now you're not giving them something to do. You're giving them the reason to do or not to do that thing. That's a silly example, but if you can point to the bigger thing, like the reason behind it. And I know it's tough because sometimes you're like, well, because I'm your parent, that's why. Sometimes maybe that works, but when we have kids that are old enough, giving them and letting them think through kind of the bigger picture, the longer term. It's not just, I'm not trying to make your life difficult by imposing this rule or by asking you to do this thing. It's because this is the vision that I have for our family. This is what I want us to be. And I think, if you want to be a part of that, this is why we're asking you to do this thing. It just provides context, I think, for the what. Well,
and then the innate nature of a person is to ask why. I think it's interesting, when kids are really little, that's always their question. Well, why? Why does that, that's like their question that they ask. The innate behaviors of all of us is wanting to know the why naturally. So
as parents, if we actually take that and answer the question rather than just blowing it off and just saying, well, because you don't understand.
So. Yeah, I'm the parent. Yeah.
And that could be huge insights for a parent to actually recognize the reason that they're asking their kid to do something.
Before we go on, let's listen to this message.
Imagine how relaxed you'll be lounging in a hammock from the Teton Hammock Company. The folks at the Teton Hammock Company create the best hammock camping gear on the planet. Not only do they use their hammocks during the lazy days of summer, but they have engineered and tested their gear in the harshest of conditions so you can be comfortable in any kind of weather. All of their gear comes with a limited lifetime warranty and are made of the highest quality nylon and polyester ripstop fabrics, and their quilts are stuffed with industry standard water-resistant down for the most comfortable night's sleep you've had in years. If you're like me and sleeping on the ground sounds like something for barbarians, then head over to www.tetonhammocks.com and hang with the best. At checkout, use the code LUMINOUS10 for an additional 10% off your order. Happy hanging!
Welcome back to The Luminous Mind with David Mead, who's helping others find their why. A lot of learning definitely could go into that. Do you want to tell us maybe a little bit more about your podcast and how you feel like that fits into the mission of helping others?
Sure. So podcast started in 2012, I think. So I had been with Simon full-time for about a year or a little bit less. And we were just thinking of some other ways of, how do we start to spread this message to more and more people. And so the real purpose of the podcast, the why of the podcast, is to help people understand the concept a little bit more fully and give them some tools that they can use to explore or to begin to use or to activate their own why as well. So we usually have a guest on the podcast. Sometimes we have Simon share a few ideas, but usually we'll talk to somebody it's either somebody who has written in to start with why and says, hey, I read the book, or I went through the why discovery process and this is what I'm doing with it. And those inspiring stories we want to share with people, not necessarily because it's a how-to or this is the way this person did it, so this is how you have to do it. But more than anything, just giving people a confidence that, wow, there are people out there that are just like me, that are doing the same kind of thing. And this was their experience. So we've had some amazing stories from, startup companies to, individuals who are using this and to just improve the quality of their own lives. We've got we interview people from all different kinds of backgrounds and industries. And it's just a good mix of just additional sort of supplemental, deeper dive ideas into the concept. And we have a lot of fun doing it.
So I kind of love how, Simon, that you kind of put out there that there isn't one way that people find their why. There's not one way to do it, and he's not there to necessarily tell them how to find the why. What do you feel like maybe some big obstacles that you've seen people face, when they're trying to find their why, and where do you think that they can learn the most from that?
Probably one of the biggest obstacles is people try to do it themselves, and it is an introspective process. The challenge is it's really hard to look at ourselves objectively, and it requires, the why comes from our past. It's a representation of who we are when we are at our natural best. So this is not something that we aspire to become. It's not something that we hope we will be one day. It is who we actually already are at our best, recognizing that we don't always operate at our best. But the way that we help people discover why with our method is we have them tell specific stories from their past that were the most impactful to them. So stories that were the most meaningful, where they learned something that they still carry with them today, anything that they feel made a real difference in their lives. And the goal with telling those stories is that those stories will be very disparate and varying. They will be from childhood, from work, from, college, from, all these different areas of their life. And while all of those stories might seem very disjointed and disconnected, the goal is to find what we call the golden thread. It's the thing that is common among all of those stories, the thing that keeps happening over and over again, the recurring themes and patterns and I don't know what else to call it other than a theme or pattern, but these things that we can see that no matter where we were, no matter what situation we were in, when we are at our very best, when we feel like things have been going, great for us, when we feel fulfilled, when we feel on top of the world, there are certain things that are in common. And so it's really hard to discover those things on our own. It requires sort of that third-party objective view to be able to pick those things out. And so it's kind of fun when I do an individual why discovery with a person, when they're done telling me their stories and I've jotted down some notes and I have some ideas for some of these things that I keep seeing coming up over and over and over and over again. I ask them, can you see the pattern here? And they look at me kind of dumbfounded and like, no, I can't. And so then it's really fun to be able to say, well, this is what I see. And it came out in this story this way. And then it came out again in this story. And it came out again in this story. And all of a sudden you see their eyes light up and they're like, oh, wow. I never would have guessed that.
Yeah.
So that's the biggest challenge, is trying to do it yourself, I think, is the biggest hurdle.
Well, and I love the idea of what you said, like that we're not necessarily always living up to our potential. Is it possible to have a why that maybe you're not at that necessary level? And then how can you kind of bump that up? How can you make that why more prominent in your life?
Of course. So, the interesting thing is that everybody has one. It's just that most people have not articulated it. When you're doing something that you love to do, when you are participating in something that just, brings you a sense of fulfillment that you don't get when you do anything else, is that those are the times when you are living in balance or in tune with your why. All the times where you feel like, oh, I would never want to go do that again. Or, that was not me at my best. All of those times are when you're doing something that's not in line with your why. The power of being able to start articulating it and talking about it and becoming conscious of your why, the thing that drives you, the contribution that you make to the lives of others and the impact that has. When you know what that is, you can put yourself consciously and intentionally in those situations more often than just having it happen by accident. And then at the end of that experience being like, wow, that was amazing. I can't wait to do that again. And this goes for, finding a job. It goes for deciding what projects you're going to be a part of, where you're going to volunteer your time. All of these things, if you know that when you show up to that opportunity, whatever it is, that you're going to be able to make the contribution that you naturally make. This is the thing that when you're at your best, you just can't help. You can't not do this thing. And we can talk about some examples of some why statements if that would help.
Yeah,
but
let's do.
If you can put yourself in a situation where you'll be able to do that thing, then you're almost guaranteeing fulfillment and satisfaction and love for that thing that you're doing. And you can choose to do those things more often rather than having it be by accident. So let's talk a little bit about why statements and maybe how that plays out. So I'll give you mine. And the way that and there's no one right way to do this either, but the way that we help people to articulate their why is in a very simple one sentence format, which is to blank so that blank. And the idea is that my why is to blank, that first blank is to make a specific contribution. So when I interact with people, this is the thing that I give. This is the thing that I bring to them that perhaps, I can bring that somebody else can't. And it's not to say that our why should be distinct and different from everybody else's, and we're the only one that should be able to do this thing. It's just, this is who we are. And there might be other people out there that are like us and kind of do the same thing, and that's fine too. But to make that contribution so that last blank is the impact, so that I have some sort of impact on their life, right? So the contribution is more of kind of an immediate thing. This is what I show up and I give. And as a result of that, there's an impact that happens. There's something in the long term that I bring to pass because of that. So with that format in mind, my why, the way that I articulated in that format, is to propel people to be a little better than they were yesterday so they can do more good in the world. So this is the reason that I loved my corporate training jobs, because I was able to propel people to be a little more than they were the day before, to learn something new, to be able to increase their skills, to be able to, think in a different way. Because a lot of the training that I did with this little company where I met Simon was training them on this idea of the golden circle of when you go out and you approach your job, it was a sales training environment. When you go out and sell, think about why you're selling what you're selling, not just what you're selling. And I would see that light go on, and I would propel them to think a little bit differently, to be a little better than they were yesterday, so that people can do more good in the world. When people are propelled to be more than they were yesterday, when I can help somebody take that step to, gain a little more confidence in themselves because they can do something they couldn't do the day before, they are then able to go off and do more good because they have knowledge, they have ability, they have skills that they didn't have the day before. So when I can put myself in a situation, or when I find myself in a situation over which it doesn't feel like I have any control, I can still show up and I can still propel people to be a little more than they were yesterday. Like, that's the contribution that I make when I'm at my natural best.
Like we talked about before, that can apply even in mundane situations of our lives, right? Like, if
Sure.
Whatever you're doing, if you end up, having that idea of like, I'm going to help this person propel themselves a little more forward, that you can use that in any aspect of your life, right? I mean, you're with your children or at work, or
because we are who we are wherever we are. So I do my best to live my why at home, just as I do at work, just as I'm out with my friends. And, your why is the reason people love you. It's the reason your friends love you. It's the reason your colleagues love you. It's the reason your family loves you. It's because you give them this thing that you can't not give them. And that's what they love you for. That's what they remember you for. That's the legacy that you're building, that when, it comes time to put that phrase on your tombstone, they will say, this person did this. This is what they this is what they brought to the lives of people. That's really what your why is.
Well, and tell us, do you feel like there are any personal habits that someone can adopt in their life that will help them kind of stick with their why so that they don't get out of balance? Can we use the fact that we're feeling out of balance maybe to push ourselves back in there? I mean, what would you say to, some habits that we could, involve in our lives?
Yeah. This isn't exactly a habit, but I would say the first thing, or one of the things, is to do everything you can, especially at the beginning, to kind of get your why into your bones. So first of all, discover it, figure out what it is. And again, there are different ways of doing that. But once you have discovered that and get a sense for what it is that you bring, what it is that you contribute to the lives of people and the impact that you have, write it down and put it in a few places where you can see it. So put it on your, bathroom mirror, put it on your computer, put it on your dashboard, places where you can see it day after day after day, so that you can kind of get used to it and get comfortable with it and begin to remind yourself that, whatever situation I'm going into, this is the way that I should try to show up. And so just, again, becoming more, because we go through most of our lives not knowing what our why is. So when we finally figure it out, it's going to take a little bit of doing to get it into our bones. And so I'd say that's step one. Then the second habit is to talk about it. So that could be, depending on what the situation is, but before you start any kind of project, or something as simple as when you start an email, when you're asking for something, or when you're approaching a problem or a challenge, think of that why and what you're really trying to accomplish, and the sort of the world that you imagine, the impact that you want to have, and use that as a filter for the decisions that you make, the partnerships that you create, the projects that you take on, the work that you do, and ask yourself, am I going to be able to bring about that impact? Am I going to be able to have the contribution that I know I make when I'm at my very best if I do this thing, if I make this decision, if I go forward with this particular thing that I'm looking at? So it's just starting to use your why sort of as a filter for the decisions that you make. And at first, that's hard and it takes conscious effort, but over time, there's a distinction that we use a lot between the difference between doing and being. And we know what we do, and we usually show up and we do things really well because that's what we're used to, and we're used to completing tasks and sort of getting stuck in that what in the doing. But when we understand and begin to internalize our why, it changes who we are being. It changes the way we show up. It changes the kind of person that we are. And even though we might not change what we're doing at all, the way that we come across when we're doing those things changes when we approach it from the context of why.
Exactly. And do you have an idea of maybe how we can come to that idea of our why? I mean, you named some points, but...
Sure. I mean, there's our website, startwithwhy.com. There's an online course that has, videos and exercises, and basically Simon will walk you through the process of discovering your why. That's one way to do it. There are other, like I said, we certainly don't have the market cornered for this type of work. There are other life coaches and, other resources of people that do this kind of thing. So the biggest thing I would say is don't try to do it alone. Even on the online course that we have, we encourage people to work with a partner, and we, tell them how to do that. So you can do it a formal way like that, or if you want to do it a little more informally and just to even start getting a sense of what your why may be, just a couple of questions to ask yourself. And this correlates directly with how we would articulate a why statement, which is thinking about your contribution and your impact on the lives of people. And the easiest way to do that is, again, to think back to some specific stories, or think back to people that you have mentored or coached, or people that you've had a significant impact on their life, specific experiences where you have either done something really meaningful for somebody else, or somebody else has done something meaningful for you that you think to yourself, wow, I really want to do more of that. I admire that in that person. When we can think of these specific experiences and sort of start to ask ourselves, in these situations where I have felt fulfilled, where I have felt at my best, what was the contribution that I was making, or what contribution was somebody making to me that I valued, right? It's got to go beyond the what. So it's not about teaching. It's not about, the job that you have. It's not about doing the, whatever the day-to-day task was. It's the bigger thing. What was the bigger thing that they contributed? What was the human thing that was contributed in that story? And then the second question to ask is just around the idea of, when I show up and I make this contribution, when I show up and I give this thing, this human thing that I provide when I'm at my best, what difference does that make? What do I cause to happen for other people? What are other people able to go on and do because I show up and make that contribution? And even if you can just answer those couple of questions or start getting some thoughts around those couple of questions, that's a good way to start getting a sense of what your why is and the contribution and impact that you make on the lives of people. Then you can, choose to be conscious of that when you interact with other people and do more of it.
Oh, that's great. Well, I feel bad. I kind of had you reiterated a couple of times of things that you can do, but I really think that when we're trying to look for that why, that we really get lost. I mean, we can be working on it and it's right there. It's very present. And then all of a sudden we kind of sink back into our what and our how again. And so we definitely want to keep that forefront. But you mentioned that there's maybe other resources besides reading Start With Why and Leaders Eat Last. Do you have maybe other books that you feel like have been really helpful in this direction? I
think I don't mean to just peddle another one of Simon's books, but on leadership specifically, and the reason that I bring this one up is just because, you have a lot of your listeners that are doing the self-directed learning and obviously impacting kids. I think Simon's third book, which is very different than the first two, it's called Together is Better, and it's a little short illustrated book. It's basically it's written as a kid's illustrated story, but it talks all about leadership. And I think one of the things that, we think about leadership as being so important for adults, but it's also so important to get kids started on the right path of leadership from a young age as well. And so just the format that it's in, it wasn't necessarily intended for kids, but we've had so many people write in and say, man, my kids saw the book just because of the way that it's illustrated. They picked it up. They were interested in it because it had pictures. So they started reading it to their kids, and then kids are loving this book. And it just takes you through a simple little fable, just a story of leadership. And on each page, there's a quote from Simon on leadership, and it sort of walks you through that story. And it's a great little, easy read, but really puts leadership into good context and good perspective. So I think that's a good one. The other ones that are good are Man's Search for Meaning by Viktor Frankl is a good one. Again, it's an older book, but has some good stuff in there just on the ideas of purpose. So
when he was
honestly, I've got a
concentration camp survivor. Yeah. Okay. Love that one.
Yeah. Those are, I don't read as much as I should. I have a huge stack of books that I need to get through, and I just don't have the time. But so I'm not the best person to ask for books, but those would be the couple that I would recommend.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad that you mentioned the book by Simon.
Together is Better.
Yeah. I'm so glad that you mentioned Together is Better, because I saw that on your website, and I did think that it kind of reminded me of a children's book. And I think that especially as parents and as families, that we want to really be pushing or putting forth these ideas of leadership to our kids, to create that better world and to really have them start thinking about those questions. Sometimes we don't hit those questions until we're later in life, and all of a sudden like, well, why are we doing this? Even though for years we're not happy or whatever. And when we finally can start asking the why behind it, I think that's when we really find our true happiness and, start moving in that direction. Great.
Yeah, of course.
We kind of talked about with your why, but, if you could leave a legacy, what do you hope that's going to be? And, how do you hope that the things that you're doing now is going to weave into that?
It's a good question. I haven't really thought about my own personal legacy. I certainly hope that the why that I just shared with you about propelling people to be a little more than they were yesterday, that will direct and drive my actions for the rest of my life. But I feel like just being part of Simon's team and being part of something so much bigger than myself, the legacy that I want to be a part of is the legacy that our little organization, Start With Why, is trying to leave, which is that we imagine a world in which the vast majority of people wake up inspired to go to work, feel safe while they're there, and go home at the end of the day fulfilled by the work that they do. That's a very different world than the one we live in now.
Yeah.
But it's been really encouraging over the last 7 years to see that shift happening and more people gravitating toward this idea of purpose and realizing that, work, whatever that looks like, whether that is in an office or at home or paid or not, it can and should be something fulfilling, something that we love to do, something that we can bring our best selves to. And for so long, it has not been. It's been drudgery. It's been something that we have to do. It doesn't only affect, people in that, during what they do during the day, but when they come home or when they, reconnect with family, it has a horrible effect on what's happening with families and communities. When we hate our jobs or when we go there because we have to, not because we want to, and we're not fulfilled by what we do every day, it has ripple effects on the rest of our communities. And so we're focusing on sort of the business side. This is a very human concept, but I think, focusing on the business side is going to reach a lot of people and hopefully make a big, big difference in the way people show up to work and come home at the end of the day.
Yeah. Well, and those emotions make such a big difference, don't you think? That's kind of what we were talking about. Like when you carry that negative emotion about how you hate this or don't want to be doing this, and it changes to more of a constructive, like, why I do these things in my life, it changes that emotion and we show up better in all situations. Sure. That's great.
Yeah.
So before we say goodbye, do you have any final parting words for our listeners? And then give us your contact information, how we can find out more about finding our why.
Sure. So I don't know, parting advice, I would just say the one thing that is so important in all of this is patience. Finding and articulating a why is not an easy thing to do. It's a simple concept, but it's not easy to do. And not only does it take patience to find it and articulate it, but it also takes patience to begin living it. Because like I said, so many of us don't discover our why until later on in life. So we've got our habits, we're sort of set in our ways. And so to be able to change those things, take it a step at a time, be patient with yourself, recognize that we're not always at our best and you won't always be. But, I would just say, stay the course. It's worth it in the end. And then as far as contact information, startwithwhy.com is probably the best way to get more information on this. You can contact us on that website as well. The other thing is, if you're interested, if you like videos and that sort of content, if you just Google Simon Sinek, Sinek, you will find pages and pages and pages of videos of different things that he talks about that are related to these concepts.
Oh, that's great. I love the idea of being patient with ourselves, because it definitely, kind of like you were saying with your why, hopefully everyone's just being a little bit better today than they were yesterday. And, we're making that progress. And there are so many great resources on the website. Again, that's startwithwhy.com. And like you said, you can Google all kinds of videos and really great things, but we will be sure to link all that information that we've discussed today on our website. But thank you so much, David, for joining us and helping us light our minds on fire. I so appreciate it.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks for helping us share the idea.
Thank you for listening to The Luminous Mind. To learn more about David Mead and Start With Why, go to our show notes at theluminousmind.net. Be sure to become a subscriber to our free email list and get our new monthly newsletter. Then check out the Services tab to see how we can continue to assist you, our fire starters. Also, to help us continue production of illuminating content, go to the Sponsor tab at theluminousmind.net for more information on sponsorship and affiliate programs. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, Google+, Pinterest, and now Instagram. Get our free audio content by subscribing on YouTube, iTunes, and Stitcher. To help us grow, consider these easy ways. Tell your friends about us, leave us a review, share our content. Tell us how we can help you so together we can continue to light minds on fire and change the paradigm of education.